I'm Deputy General Counsel at GCFA. For what that means is I'm attorney and I'm the attorney who deals always with the group ruling, and the group ruling is inherently connected with EINs. So I know we'll have hopefully some questions about that going forward. And I'm going to just jump in and tell you, hopefully, all things EIN related. And if it's too basic, hold on, because hopefully we get into some of the more complicated things. So to start out, if you didn't know what an EIN, it's the employer identification number. It is the tax identification number for businesses and organizations in the United States. So it doesn't work outside of the United States. Honestly, it's a lot like the Social Security number for a business. The difference is it doesn't need to be kept secret. It is a 9-digit number. It looks in this format with the 2 numbers with the dash often, which is helpful to know when you're looking for it. And it is only issued by the IRS. You can't get it from anywhere else. When do you get an EIN? It is when you form an entity, a legal entity. Sort of an example of what I mean by that is often churches have preschools attached to them. This is the most common, or a food bank. I think I saw somebody in the chat mention they were with the food bank program attached to a church. And when they are attached to the church, they could be their own separate legal entity, or they could be a part of the church. So to sort of give you some basic guidelines of the difference is if the preschool, I'm going to stick with my preschool example, has, it might have a separate name for the program, for the ministry, but it still operates under the church. It's covered by the church's insurance. The employees are the church's employees. There's a committee that runs it that reports to the church. That means the entity is part of the church and it would not have its own EIN. That actually can cause some confusion and some heartache down the road. There are some reasons why people do it, but for the most part, that leads to mostly unpleasant experiences. But it also could be a separate legal entity. Maybe they're not part of the church. They have their own insurance. They don't report directly to the church, but they're connected. They've maybe paid rent. Then they would have their own separate EIN because they're a separate legal entity. So that's sort of when it comes up the most. Another thing that often happens if a church is unincorporated and then it incorporates, you then need an EIN once you incorporate. It's a new one because you're changing legal status from an unincorporated thing to an incorporated thing. How do you get one? The IRS makes this super easy for you. It's online now. And you can cancel out a paper document if you're opposed to doing the online version. It's just going to take a little bit more time and be a little bit more tedious. But when you get this presentation, if you need this, the yellow is actually a link. So you can click on this and it'll take you to that website. One of the tips related to getting your own EIN is make sure you check the right organization. If you are a church or a church organization, you want to go and make that selection. It's under view additional types. And that will help with them automatically setting you up, hopefully, as a non-filer when everything goes right with IRS. It means that you don't automatically have to file any sort of form, like the Form 990. Churches don't have to do that, but also other income tax forms. When do you use your EIN? A whole bunch of times. When you pay your employees, it'll be on their W-2, it'll be on the 1099. When you set up a bank account, the bank is going to ask you for your EIN, sort of like they're going to ask you for your Social Security number if you're setting up a bank account. And they often want it tied to your name, and they often want the official letter that the IRS gave you with the EIN. So as I meant in the last slide, the way you get it, often it shows up on the screen and they say they'll send you an official letter. I would take a screenshot of when they issue you with EIN so you have a copy. And when the IRS mails you yours, keep that in a safe file. Make a copy of it so you have it. Put it in a couple places in the church so that the treasurer has it, the pastor has it. There's a couple people who have it, because having that official letter from the IRS also just helps. So when the bank asks for it, you can produce it really easily. If you have to file any taxes, sometimes churches have to file UVIT taxes. And when you are showing tax exempt status. So I'm going to explain a little bit in the next slide related to what I mean by that. This question is, I am in the group ruling, what EIN do I use? And you'll see in the second bullet, there's not a separate number for proving your tax exempt status. It is your EIN, and it's sort of like a little flag gets attached to your EIN saying your tax exempt organization. So if someone searches you, they can find that. Now that's going to get a little complicated, and we'll go down that road in just a second. But when you're in the group ruling and you're looking for applying for grants or whatever, and people are asking you this because you're trying to show this little flag, whose do you use? Do you use GCFA's or do you use your own? And almost always answer is your own. You're the entity that will receive the funds. You have your own flag attached to your EIN, even if it's harder to show that flag. And it's you who will be also needing to verify. Like if you get a grant and they ask, did you use it for the purposes of the grant? If GCFA were to receive those funds, we could not make that verification. Also, often when people apply and they send it to us, it's First United Methodist Church, and that's all we get. So we couldn't even send them on if we wanted to, or if we could do it. So simple answer, always use your own EIN when verifying your tax exempt status. There are tiny few exceptions, and this is why I put TechSoup here. Some very few organizations understand exactly what the group ruling is, and they will ask for the group ruling holder's EIN. And they will say, like, if you're in a group ruling, click this button. They will ask for GCFA EIN. Again, we have directions specifically for TechSoup. If you can click on this when you get this presentation, it's a link that goes over that. That's not exactly the purpose of this webinar, but I want you to have that information. And when you go there, they will ask for GCFA EIN because they understand that you are a subordinate organization, and they will ask for your information independently of GCFA. And they will not see it as GCFA applying for the grant, which makes a significant difference. So another issue that often comes up is you need a sales tax exemption. How does this work with your EIN and your tax exempt status? Sales tax is done state by state. Not every state gives sales tax exemption to local churches. So it's possible, I know Georgia does not. So if you live in one of those states, it's possible that you don't have it, and that's why you're butting your head against the wall. But you would reach out often to the Secretary of State, and you would apply for it. The sales tax exemption, each state has its own process, but often they do require your EIN and your proof of your exemption. So however you got that exemption, if it's through the group ruling, they'll ask for that documentation, because that's part of the way that they determine that you're eligible for their requirements of state sales tax exemption. They may issue you another number that is your state sales tax exemption number. I've often seen people confuse this with their EIN. Those are two different things. So like I mentioned, sometimes proving the little tag is on your EIN can be more difficult than other times. So when you are applying for a grant and you enter your EIN into the system, it is possible that you won't show up, that the tag is not connected in the grant writer system to your EIN. And that happens for multiple reasons. So the IRS puts out a publication for organizations that apply directly to them that they call the Select Check tool. You will not appear on that database. That is one way. Essentially, there's a flag attached to that. You're on the database, your EIN is flagged as one of an exempt organizations. Another way is the IRS has a second database called EOBMF, Exempt Organization Business Master EOBMF, Business Master File. There we go. And you could appear on that as a group ruling subordinate, and that's another database that essentially is a flag. You're under the category of exempt organizations, and people can find you that way. You likely won't appear on that database automatically if you're in a group ruling, because church group rulings are special. But you don't need to appear on any of these databases to actually be a 501c3. There is an IRS publication, 4573, that states you're not required to be listed on these databases, and you can have recognition from GCFA. And so when you go on to prove your status as a church under GCFA, under GCFA's group ruling, we give you this publication. So don't worry, you don't have to find it. If you want to have it independently for your files, great. You can just search it and find it as well. But don't worry, this publication says you don't have to appear on one of those databases. So how do you prove your status? If you're a church or a United Methodist organization, you can prove your status by going to UM Group Ruling. We'll give you a lovely PDF that includes a letter, our letter from the IRS, and the publication that I was just talking about. That little packet is proof. If you are not eligible for inclusion in a group ruling, you would need your proof, or your organization. It's not you. It's not an individual thing. If your organization isn't eligible for inclusion in a group ruling, you would need to get a letter from the IRS. There's only two ways to get it. So, and you'll see there's a little tip here at the bottom of the box, and it says find an email on the grantor site. So often, if they digitize their process and you put the EIN in and it's not showing that you have that like flag, this is the way I describe it, the flag attached to it, you're not appearing on one of the databases. Some grantors don't understand group rulings, and so you might need to find someone to send them the packet and say, hey, please look at the end, read the publication, to try to understand it. Another thing that we have done is GCFA has partnered with GuideStar. It is a repository for a lot of large companies, like Walmart uses GuideStar as their backend database. And what we have done is we can send some of our subordinate organizations directly to GuideStar. They will create a listing for you on their website, and that will publicly show the world that you have this tag if individuals are using GuideStar or their companies are using GuideStar as a backend. Now, you will be given something that GuideStar calls bronze level. If you're interested in this process, we have more information about GuideStar, but you can go and claim your profile and even update it with more information about yourself to help donors make decisions about giving you grants or funding. I lost my EIN. Where can I find it? This is a common question that we get. And you'll see the IRS has a link specifically directed to this, because I think they probably get that same question a lot too. And this is why I suggest, if you're in a position of getting your EIN for the first time, save that paper everywhere. It's really helpful to have that documentation. But if you don't, the IRS makes some recommendations of like reverse doing it, reverse finding it, like go to the bank and ask for the EIN that you gave them then, if there's been transitions between treasurers or leadership. Another thing is find out that, like, if you're really up against a problem and you really need the official documentation, you can call the IRS. It can be inconvenient and you might have to wait on hold. I highly recommend doing that in the morning, first thing in the morning, and just have something else to do in the background. Now, a problem that I want to tell you about is if you call the IRS, they might say you don't have an EIN. We are aware of this problem. We are not quite sure what happened or why, but we've gotten some indications that lead us to believe that essentially, if you haven't used your EIN, haven't had a reason to do different filings in their database system, I use the word like ghosted, goes dark, like shades out your EIN line in their database because you haven't used it after so long. They issue so many EIN and so many companies that go away without notifying the IRS that they've gone away. And so it's a way for them to phase out EINs. We have been told that they never reuse numbers. That's why they have such a long, it's such a long number. And so you can get it to sort of reappear possibly by asking GCFA to update you on a database. There's a radio button if you go through the group ruling process, if that's something that you're working on. If you apply directly to the IRS, your EIN should not go away because it should appear on a database that's getting regularly updated into their system. So we're not exactly sure what happens, but don't panic. Often the other thing is the individuals who answer the phone at the call center for the IRS are not fluent in group ruling. I think it's an uncommon experience for them to get questions directly related to group ruling. And so they're not always highly trained on answering those questions. So you might get some different answers if they say your EIN doesn't exist. And if that's something, like if you are in the group ruling and that's something that you come against, if you reach out to GCFA, we will help you try to send back backs that we hope can help solve the problem with the IRS. Sometimes that backs takes a long time, so please know everything with the IRS requires a lot of patience. I also wanted to point you to this very helpful link. This link answers a lot of EIN questions. If you go to the IRS, you'll see highlighted in purple, lost or misplaced your EIN. It can take you there as well. Canceling an EIN. So if your church is closing, if something's happening, it can tell you how to do that. And it also talks about responsible party related to an EIN. So one of the things that has happened now, this is a fairly new rule in the tax world because the tax world does fluctuate, but this side of the tax world, not very often. And what they have required now is that someone sign for an EIN. And I think it's because they want to identify a human that is tied to the organization that they can contact and have there's some sort of accountability instead of just like you can go and make up random names and create random companies. There's some human that must be attached to it. So when you apply for an EIN, it talks about this. You must identify a responsible party. That's an individual who would primarily be responsible for funds. We often recommend like the treasurer, maybe the pastor, but the pastor moves a lot. And so you'd want to update who the responsible party is every time there's a move. So that's just something else, sort of a subcategory tied to EINs. It is now a requirement that even if you filed forever ago, you should update your responsible party. I have not heard of any accountability for this. It's just something that the IRS put out. So I don't know how that applies for you in the past, but for sure, if you're applying for one now, you will know that you'll need to list a responsible party. And now I'm ready for questions. You heard me talk for 20 minutes about EINs, and that's a lot for like one little thing, but there's a lot of side issues. So I'm happy to answer any specific questions that really drew you into this webinar in the first place.
Well, we have a few, and while we answer those few, I imagine, like always, more will start coming in. So the first one is, you mentioned that if a church is not incorporated and goes through the process of incorporating, that they'll need to file again, right? So that, I think, sparked a question. Does this mean that an unincorporated church does not need an EIN number?
Great question. No, you need an EIN number. It's just you would get a new one if you incorporate. So any legal entity, which is a local church, even if it's not incorporated, you're an unincorporated association, and you would still need an EIN. If you are unincorporated and thinking about incorporation, we also have, I'm just going to throw this out there. We have some information on how come that's a good idea. and things to consider if you want to incorporate. But I'll at the very end of this show you a link to get to that information.
Next question, it's an interesting one. A vendor is requesting the SS4 application in addition to the EIN. It's going to be difficult to find. Any thoughts on why this vendor might be requesting that?
The application for getting the EIN, that is unique. Often they might, I don't know why a vendor is requesting that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, you might push back a little bit and ask why, or maybe they typed in the wrong thing and they want you to fill out. There's a form specifically for identifying your EIN number, which for some reason, just because I'm talking about it, has left my head. But where they want you to say, the whole point of the form is to say what your EIN is, fill out some basic information, say your EIN, and then sign the bottom to verify it's actually your EIN. So maybe they're just confusing that form. Well, while we keep asking questions, I'll see if I can identify that for you.
Here's another one. So the local church changed their EIN numbers.
Mm-hmm.
The treasurer went to the bank to update the accounts, and the bank rep looked up the EIN and stated that it belonged to someone else. Now what? I understand. Maybe that has to do with the responsible party?
No, so the EIN belonged to somebody else. I don't know how they would know that. So there is not a public database for EINs. You cannot go in and search EIN, here's name tied to it. So I wonder if they are suggesting that maybe the EIN is tied to someone else who already has a bank account, and it's possible there's a typo or something like that. So I would bring in your letter and ask some questions about where they're finding that information, and what's going on, because I can't go and search organization, what's their EIN. I can only do that to try to find the flag. Or to find filings, public filings.
Sure. We have a question here. I sent in a form updating our responsible party at least 6 months ago, but our old one is still listed. Any suggestions?
Where did you find it listed? So if you could answer that in the chat, and you can only do what you can do with the IRS. So sending it the form is all that you can do. And we have found too, when we're trying to update information with the IRS and we submit it, that it doesn't always happen quickly. And we're not sure why it happens quickly sometimes and doesn't other times. So I would recommend if it's bothering the person who's the initial responsible party, you can submit it again, same thing, and see if that helps. Also, it might take patience. And if you could tell me where you're looking to find the responsible party, in the chat, that would be helpful.
Lisa, she said they found it when they received a check from the IRS and it still came attention to the old responsible party name.
Gotcha. So I imagine that they haven't updated it yet. And it's, but again, you can submit it again. We have found for our purposes, understandably, the IRS doesn't put as many resources into the nonprofit sector. And so when it doesn't make money off of that sector. And so there's less resources there. And sometimes it takes time and persistence.
Okay, this next one is, my church has merged and changed names. How do we change the EIN to the new name?
So there's a couple ways of doing that. And it should be in the question answer if you're looking for the address that I'm going to describe. So you can either notify GCFA if you're in the group ruling and ask that we submit the information to the EOBMF, that's the database, and we'll try to do that. The other thing that you can do is there's a mailing address to update your information because you don't file. So a lot of the questions refer to, if you're a filer, check the box on your annual filing, which does not apply to you. So you can send the mailing directly to the same tax box or address and just inform them of your updated name change.
Apparently, there's a lot of issues around the EIN number causing issues. So we have a couple back to back here. One person offered up that their churches also struggled with opening bank accounts because the bank was refusing the EIN. But we're going to go on to Daniel's question saying, I am employed by 2 churches, and I have noticed that when it comes time for taxes, one church's EIN number allows me to file everything online, and the other EIN number is not accepted to file online. So they have to mail their tax information. Is there a way to fix this issue?
So we believe you're bringing up an issue that we're hoping to get fixed. We actually have a meeting with someone, and we finally found a person to talk to in the Treasury Department to hopefully address this exact issue. And it's happening in the next month. It's been really hard to find and to identify that person. So what I have are stories for you that aren't always the most reliable or helpful. But I believe if you go to the group ruling, if it's in the group ruling, like add me to the EOBMF when you register, when you apply for the letter, there you'll see it. It's a radio button on the application. It's pretty clear. We will send your information to the IRS. And I believe if you get on the EOBMF, then you can do electronic filing. That is the story that we have heard, is people have been told to try to get on the EOBMF by when they call the call center, and that this solves their problem. I, again, am going through stories, and they are only so reliable. Hopefully we will solve this problem right now. Just so you know, when we ask the IRS to get someone listed on the EOBMF, we have to send a fax. The only reason we still have a fax line is for this purpose, because no one in the world uses this. And so we're dealing with really slow technology, really slow progress here. And so we're hopeful that after having a conversation with someone in the Treasury Department, we can make some movement. And if we do that, we will plaster it everywhere on our website if we're able to get that, and we'll get back to
you. So next question is, they want to know, what is this group ruling that you keep referring to?
Yeah. So group ruling is one way that you can get recognition of your tax exempt status. And for local churches, it's super useful because there's only 2 ways that you can get recognition. One is by applying directly to the IRS, and one is as applying to GCFA. Essentially, the IRS delegated a portion of its responsibilities to GCFA or United Methodist organizations. So if you're a United Methodist thing, church, district, annual conference, general agency, jurisdiction, that's really easy for us to do. You're exempt by statute. So we have a process and we have all your data for doing that. You can go to the Group Ruling website. It was one of the slides. And then you can apply that way. The other way for recognition is apply directly to the IRS. So that's really helpful for churches because the IRS is expensive. It takes a while. And we've even heard, again, some stories of churches receiving feedback that they need to apply to GCFA rather than the IRS, because that was the whole point of the group ruling, is to not deal with churches. Hopefully that's not any of our organization situations, because you do technically have a right to apply to the IRS. And as I mentioned about some of these databases, there's a reason why you might want to.
Awesome. Yeah, just to touch on a couple questions here. This recording and this presentation will all be sent out to everyone who registered for this webinar, and feel free to use that, share that, play that for everyone. We just really want to make sure we get the knowledge out there and empower our churches, ministries here. The current last question, we'll see if any more come in, is if a new church start doesn't know how, let's see, if a new church start doesn't know how to apply online, can the conference apply for them, but we don't want to be the responsible party?
So, then you need to have the person who you need to have the information to fill out for the responsible party. Someone has to do it to get the EIN to fill out that information. And so, um, you'll want that in advance if you're applying for them, or you can just send them the link and
And
give them the tip to like their church as an option of type of organization.
who typically would be a responsible party, just to give an example?
Like the treasurer or sometimes the pastor, depending on the size of the congregation. It's best probably to be the treasurer, someone who's in charge of the money, who would keep track of the EIN.
Sure. All right. And Allison, I have your question noted here. We're going to follow up with you specifically after this about that. So any other questions? We're not going to drag this out.
One more,
Oh, go ahead.
Vincent, and I don't know, I didn't see. Allison. The I saw somebody asking about which EIN to use if the church merges. If you have a dominant church, like one that merges into another one, you would use the EIN of the church that remains. If you're merging two equal entities, and like coming up with like a new name, new structure, new everything, then it's possible to just get a new EIN, or it's possible maybe for you to choose. So that is also, there's an FAQ about that on the IRS if you want to see their analysis, but essentially the dominant one, or maybe get a new one, or if that seems like not helpful for banking purposes or whatever, you can probably choose.
And as far as updating EIN, really what? Just responsible party information. Does that form the 8822B?
That's right.
So we'll do the 8822B to update. Put that in the chat here. Awesome. Well, I think that is all we have in the chat as far as questions go. So we want to thank you all for being here. Like I said, you'll get a copy of this presentation, both the video and the slides. And if you have any needs, you'll also get information for our connectional relations team. And you can always reach out. And if you have any questions on this, or even if you have ideas on other webinars that we could do that would be information that you would find helpful. So, all right. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your week.